Hi everyone, Lam Bam Thank You Ma'am here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of this new Sprain, The Lamb as Effigy. This is the sophomore full-length LP from California experimental rock outfit Sprain, one of my most anticipated albums of this year, mostly because I found the teasers to this record to be so fire and so surprising. There's the intro Man Proposes, God Disposes, which is kind of like all of my favorite genre itches being scratched at once. From the dramatic and decadent little string intro to the repeating and hypnotizing rock instrumentation to follow that feels like what you would get if Swans started a post-hardcore band. Of course, this instrumentation is topped with all of this manic spoken word, complete with unhinged rants referencing different kinds of guilt. Animals eat animals, etc. Animals animals, etc. Do I have to spell it out for you? All of this eventually breaking into these off-kilter and harrowing noise rock passages that feature more intense spoken word. As the song progresses, there's more and more layers. It finishes up with this blurry, gigantic swell of post-rock instrumentation. It is a killer single that also makes for a great intro track. Other tastes in the lead up to this album included Privilege of Being, which is a 5-minute cut that I think is a bit of a tough sell as a teaser, mostly because it feels like a super abstract vocal and drone meditation, with some really intense noise and glitch layers eventually smothering everything in the mix. That is until the track resolves into this really gorgeous string outro that feels like sunlight breaking through the clouds after a crazy storm. Again, odd taste as a teaser, but within the context of the record, the song does work as a great transitional moment of sorts, setting things up for one of the biggest tracks on the record, which I'll get into later. We Think So Ill of You was the final stop before Album Town, and it's a pretty shrill and horrifying piece of noise and experimental rock. It may be the shortest track on this record at 4 minutes or so, but it's also the heaviest and most pummeling. Meanwhile, the lyrics and vocals on here are unsettling for a few reasons. They sound so crazed, but simultaneously read as very lucid, with a deep sense of self-loathing and worthlessness. The most disturbing part being the final moments that describe some kind of nightmarish talk show where the audience is everyone you've ever known, and they're being shown on a screen every sin you've ever committed. Wash, 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 wash. The whole thing reminds me of a really scary scene from Ari Aster's Beau is Afraid. Now, at this point, after having heard these tracks, I'm salivating for this record, desperate to hear it, but I realize in the lead up to it, this thing is just 8 tracks long, and yet the entire runtime is over 90 minutes, due in part to there being not 1, but 2 tracks on this thing that go over 24 minutes, which might be strategically placed after 3 tracks on each side of the album, but these are still pretty gigantic speed bumps to be hitting audiences with in the midst of your record. Still, I was pleasantly surprised by what the band had to offer on these longer tracks, starting with Margin for Error. Now, because of this song's length, I'm not going to give you a literal play-by-play of the track, but I will say it does operate in a few different movements, the first of which being this meditative organ drone with vocals on top of it that read as kind of operatic at points. Things build up on the track from there in a very moving and theatrical way, until the song becomes this powerful monolith of rock instrumentation, developing into some of the best heavy post-rock instrumental drone stuff I've heard since the 2000s. The sound of this track and performance is crushing. It is suffocating. It's just so oppressively loud and thick and dense, but simultaneously it moves so fluidly, and it's also really soft around the edges. The band really moves through this gigantic piece quite masterfully from beginning to end, and it's really gratifying and really amazing to be led through this odyssey. Now, the second half of the track list on this thing opens up with the commercial Nude, which in terms of length is nothing to sneeze at 10 minutes. For sure, it is a slightly easier walk in the park than Margin for Error, even with the bold avant noise freak out at the start of the track, and the dejected and meandering spoken word to follow from there. The crushing riffs and harrowing vocals to follow are very Swans coded, which is not entirely a bad thing, as it's done pretty well. While it may not be my favorite progression on the entire LP, it does stand out to me on the lyrical front, really bringing home a lot of these themes once again of failures, sins, errors, flaws, being exposed or presented to an audience. There's something about the process of performing these pieces that feels kind of like an act of martyrdom for the band, or maybe the process of burning the effigy referenced in the title. Either way though, I think this track is more wondrous in the abstract than it is in practice. The commercial nude then gives way to the reclining nude, an even longer cut whose tortured progression locks me in right away. We get groaning riffs and tragic piano embellishments moving at an almost doomy pace. And as someone who has struggled in the past a lot with self-doubt and self-loathing, the content of this track cuts deep, with frontman Alex Kent singing about repeating the word idiot to himself until he's literally doing it again in an operatic way over swelling rock instrumentation that has an orchestra-like fluidity and softness to it. Now, the closer, God, or whatever you call it, is an interesting journey. Once again, this track is 24 minutes in length and feels like an exercise in cynicism and irreverence, especially given lyrics like, "These first two drafts rejected with a single written critique. Is it rapturous still, the way you fill a page? I find it to be lacking. In clash of celebrity and landfill, my depressing little you-know-what at this point is pointing down." At this point, it feels like the self-loathing the art contains is causing it to tear itself apart, not just on the lyrical front, but the instrumental front too, because there's so little coherence and cohesion to the progression of this instrumental, from all the rhythmic and riff changes to the ghoulish vocals. Section to section, the whole thing is pretty jarring as we switch off again and again. But despite all this chaos, things do begin to come together narratively a little bit more too, with a direct address to the lamb itself in the song through a conversation that ends off with these lines that profoundly affect the progression of the track from there. Would you not have me sing you softly to sleep? I can't sing if you're looking at me, which leads to multiple sections of almost complete silence on the track, with Alex Kent struggling to get the vocals together to actually sing the final parts of this song. He's muttering, he's freaking out, he's having a distant breakdown away from the mic, a very loud and odd one. Eventually, we do get some very freakish singing, heavy on the vibrato, over some washes of shimmering chords that feel a little Twin Peaksy. And while the journey up until this point was a tad bit tedious, finally getting to the end here does feel like I've passed something, or I've witnessed the record give birth to something, maybe an Eraserhead baby, I don't know. Or maybe this thing is an exorcism of the reservations and fears and madness that plague a lot of these tracks too. Look, this thing is a very dense and long and strange record, and I'm not coming here claiming to you that like I have it all figured out, or I have like the greatest understanding of what this album is and what Sprain did on it, but I can at least say I walked away deeply affected and very impressed, even if there were some tracks whose progression I wasn't blown away by, or some moments that did feel a tad bit derivative of some of my favorite bands that I've given high praise to over the years on this channel. I'm looking forward to more listens of this album to peel back its many unsettling layers. I'm feeling a strong A to a late 9 on this one. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Sprain, forever.